I, like you, grew up being told nothing but lies and nonsense, specifically about science and nature. And we all suffer the same thought in saying things about the emission of light or the emission of sound, or talking about things that don't exist, like waves, because there's no such thing as waves. But scientists love to talk about waves, and I've talked about endlessly about this concept reification of things that don't exist, like waves, emptiness, shadows, time, space, because space is not a thing. Even Nikola Tesla that. The only time Nikola Tesla loses his cool, not literally, but almost literally, is railing against the substantiation of space by relativity and the precursors of quantum of his day, because space is not a thing. And we all have heard and uttered these words ourselves, is that we'll talk about things in the ether. These things are not in or passing through the ether. They are the ether itself, rather than their perturbations. If we said there was a piece of ice, which of course hit and sunk the Titanic, passing through the North Atlantic Ocean, to take the analogy to greater clarification, we'd be talking about a modality of the ocean itself, which manifests as this hard stuff that pierced the Titanic, and then of course is just a modality of the water, is it not? In case it's frozen water. We could think of matter, by the way, which is nothing other than super high energy light, as frozen light. Isn't that neat? I've conventionally called it hard light, but frozen light kind of works too. But we have this idea of things that are in or passing through the ether. Something in the ether. Magnetism in the ether. It's like, well, no, ether. Magnetism is the ether. And the same is true of energy generation. And I suffered the incapacity to see the bleeding obvious for a long time. Not for a whole long time, but far too long. And that thinking over unity of free energy devices are impossible. And in the case that there's no such thing as a frictionless bearing, so on and so forth, even ultra-high efficiency, engines and whatnot are not over unity, because there's friction and heat and resistance met, even if it's in a vacuum. There's field resistance met such that the machine actually fights itself. And these type of over-unity devices can never work, and they never will work, and every one of them is shown on YouTube and other places. It's just absolute garbage, because they all have bearings and friction points, and they're not sealed in a vacuum bubble where all the air is pumped out where it meet air resistance. There's just a million things where the machine fights itself. Free energy, and that's where I made a mistake. I was accurate in saying that free energy would never be achieved through a type of working mechanical machine. It's completely impossible. It's just absolutely 100% possible to get an over-unity device that way. I have, however, said that, and I know it cannot be invalidated, because no current generator, and I had to work off of a completely different tangent than the mental virus that really the whole world suffers from. And that is in understanding the nature of our current so-called power generating devices. And I've spoken about this before, but not in incredible length, but people, have understood what I said, thankfully, some Tesla folks and others. There's a huge difference between manifesting, i.e. conjuring, almost makes it sound like magic, versus generating. AC power generators do not, or any DC generator as well, do not actually generate power, they manifest power. Generation, by definition, requires input of one thing and transformation of that into something else. Well, sure, that's how current power generators work. They transform kinetic energy, which is potential, and that is in turn turned into electromotive force, like a hydroelectric dam or wind, not solar. Solar is the transformation of one energy circuit of light the collection of that of generating an electrical circuit through a special medium, so solar is highly inappropriate to actually put on that one. What these AC generators are arch forms, as I've specifically said, and makes things really simple, such that even a child could understand it, is that all power generators are inside-out magnets, where the magnetic field is on the inside and the dielectric plane of reflection is on the outside, and when this is varied over a period of time, it generates ether torsion, and this ether torsion is what is conventionally called electricity, which is a compound of dielectricity and magnetism. Phi times psi equals Q in Planck of electrification. Charles Proteus Steinmetz said this in Electrical Discharges, Waves, and Impulses, page 14, I believe. A far more intelligent man than Nikola Tesla. Big fan of Tesla, but Charles Proteus Steinmetz was a lot more intelligent. He actually perfected laminated steel, perfected Tesla's so-called AC generator, which is not a generator at all. This is an arch form. People ask me what an arch form is, which I kind of find that really odd that anybody would ask what an arch form is. Arch form is nothing other than a symbol or a specific geometry. In other words, when you actually create a geometry with magnets and steel and copper, other materials can be used. And this specific geometry or arch form is varied with respect to time. In the temporal variable, electromotive force is generated. But it is not generated, it is manifest. Nothing is input from one place to the other. Falling water is not giving up something of itself to a generator when it actually passes through a so-called generator. The same is true of wind. You know, wind is not giving up something of itself. Sure it is. It's kinetic energy. Try to explain wireless power induction. Please explain how the kinetic energy of wind is transformed directly, because that's what generation requires, is a transformation of one thing into something else. Like you're going to transform eggs, flour, sugar, and whatnot, and you're going to generate a cake. You start out with something, and then you actually generate something from those inputs. But that's not the case. If I were to sit here and spin a so-called generator by hand, I'm not giving up something of myself. Sure you are. You're burning calories. This is the kinetic energy lost. Burning calories turning that generator. There's no transference from one to the other. Me eating food, which generates calories, which I would use to spin the input shaft of a generator to a variable, to create a time-based variable for the generation of electromotive force. Those calories are in no way, shape, or form in the matter of my movement to generate power, a transference of one thing into another. Power is made manifest due to the arch form, varied with respect to time. And getting to the point is that we do not need a kinetic input to generate power. We don't. Understanding gyromagnetic precession, look this up, it's also too called the L'Amour frequency. By utilization of the L'Amour frequency, i.e. gyromagnetic precession, we can create a temporal lag. This is also too called electromagnetic retardation. That's actually a very specific term. There's an entire thick book written about it by Dr. Oleg Djefimenko. It's not like something harebrained or crazy. He is a genius of electrical theory. Nowhere near that of Tesla or Steinmetz or Heaviside or Maxwell. Still a genius nonetheless. He actually wrote college books on what electricity is. His math is brilliant. It's called electromagnetic retardation. Through the use of this phase disparity, or EMR, we could create a temporal variable in a non-moving solid-state component which would generate power. Because that's all current so-called power generators do. They are not generating power, they're manifesting it by having moving mechanical components that are changed with respect to time against the dielectric reflector for generation of manifestation of electromotive force. Now, I don't know if people ask me about what an arch form is. Motion comes from energy, right? We turn motion into energy. But we're not turning motion into energy. We are taking advantage of motion, this kinetic energy, taking advantage of it to create a temporal variable in an arch form. Kinetic energy is not transformed into electromotive force. That would be genuine power generation. But no so-called power generator is generating power. They're manifesting it by taking advantage of that kinetic force to vary the field arch form with respect to time, which generates electromotive force. And this is a huge distinction with a difference, and I've not heard anybody talk about this fact. Heaviside said that the giant generators of his day were churning up the ether, which is exactly what they're doing. They're creating electromagnetic force, change the field with respect to time. Well, wonderful. Ask a scientist to define the term energy. They can't define field, they can't tell you what light is, and they can't tell you what energy is. They'll say, well, energy is the potential to do work. Well, that's some circular reasoning there. What is energy? When you start talking about potential energy, too, oh, that really confuses them. Potential. In other words, by changing the position of something and give it greater potential by dielectric acceleration, or what is conventionally called gravity. Well, we place a bunch of water really high up, we build a dam, and we let that water fall or accelerate through a set of chute systems and pass it through giant hydroelectric generators. This generates electromotive force in enormous quantities, and we pipe that out to substations and homes across America. Well, that's true. So you're saying what we're doing, we're taking the same water that sat, say, on the bottom of a lake, we're placing it higher up and allowing gravity to accelerate that water through a set of chute systems which passes through a giant AC, which is an arch form, turbine. And then that, of course, changes the field in that arch form with respect to time, which creates electromotive force. Well, that's not power generation at all. That's power manifestation. And what this means is, using retroduction in simplex apophaticism vis-a-vis the Pythagoreans, means that a simple, non-moving component, solid-state engine could be created taking advantage of electromagnetic retardation, or what is known as low frequency, i.e. geomagnetic precession, to introduce a temporal variable to generate power. What would that specific geometry be? It would be the next generation of arch form. Currently, everybody on Earth is using the caveman version arch form in the form of all current power generators, which are not generators at all. The only way for humanity to leap into the space age, if you will, leap into the future, is to have solid-state power motors. Solid-state power motors which have no input, but they have a field geometry which creates torsion in the ether with a set of waveguides. Like we could have a power box with a specific field geometry inside. We could tap off of that turbine of the universe, positive and negative leads. It's like a giant lead-acid battery, except it would never deplenish. We could also, too, vary the type of output in amps relative to the type of geometry that's in that next generation power device. This means that every house and every car, every person or every family would only need two systems, and they would never deplete unless they were like destroyed in a fire or a car wreck or something. One for your vehicle and one for your house. It would power everything in your house. There would be one variable in the power generator which would vary the output in amperage, such that if your house needed a greater current, that it would change a variable in the next generation battery, which wouldn't be a battery. A battery is a storage device. It would be next generation power device, excuse me. And that's absolutely fascinating. And this isn't theoretical. It's like, sure, you're talking about pure theory here. I know that this geometry has to exist. What that geometry is, I will not feign incredulity by saying that I know what it is. I can tell you I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I hope I can figure it out. I think our government probably has figured it out quite some time ago. But I know this type of next generation power source necessitatively must exist by understanding that all current so-called power generators do not generate power at all. They are not transforming kinetic energy into electromotive force in the form of electricity. They are not. Yeah. That's something to think about. Spent a lot of time thinking about it. I got these little 2 dolls here. Somebody knitted me. We got this fool. Ain't this really accurate? This fool Einstein. We got this smart guy here, Tesla. He had a different idea on how to generate power. His Wardenclyffe Tower. But this is not the video for discussing the Wardenclyffe Tower. Kind of accurate. It does kind of look like Tesla, doesn't it? It's pretty brilliant crochet knitting. I just glanced over and saw those. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.